Don't judge me. Stop judging others. Leave the judging to Jesus. I'm not judging. I'm just assessing. Please don't judge me while I'm judging others. More loving, less judging. Only God can judge me. Now, possibly you have seen these or similar sayings on t-shirts, caps, maybe bumper stickers on the car. Maybe you've heard people express them verbally in your company. I know at least for some of those, I've both seen them and heard them. But in addition to these popular statements touching the subject of judging, Tanya, I took the opportunity to Google. What I put in Google was sayings about judging. Well, here is a very small sample of the voluminous list that was generated by that search on Google. For instance, I found this one. Before you judge me, make sure you're perfect. Found this one. When you judge another, you do not define them, you define yourself. I found this one. You're going to have to listen closely. You can get lost in this. We judge people for judging people because judging people is wrong. You keep up with that? A little bit of circular reasoning, but we judge people for judging people because judging people is wrong. Another saying, thinking is difficult. That's why most people judge. And then I'll leave you with these two that conjoin judging and love. If you judge people, you don't have time to love them. And then love is the absence of judgment. Like I said, that's a very small sampling of what Google generated when I asked about sayings concerning judging. Now, Brother Alan Webster authored a tract entitled, Who Are You to Judge? We actually have some of those. I think it's on the left-hand side, left-hand rack on the right-hand side of that rack. But he begins the tract by asserting this: judging is a hot topic. And I think Brother Webster's right. I think that's an accurate characterization of this subject of judging. And I hope that's kind of clearly attested to by how often we see those aforementioned sayings displayed and how frequently we hear people make remarks concerning this matter of judging others. But I want to add something to what Brother Webster there said. It's not only a hot topic. The subject of judging is not only a topic that is frequently talked about, it is also a subject about which there are many different opinions and attitudes, again, suggested by those previous sayings. And let's be honest about all this. Seeing those various sayings prominently displayed, and then hearing those differing views regularly expressed, they can obviously influence other people who see them and hear them. What I mean is those sayings, those expressions, they can influence other people in how they think about judging. In other words, those things obviously are intended to influence other people and how they form their convictions about the subject of judging. I'll state the obvious. We can't stop this prolific conversation about judging. Neither can we preclude the influence that such conversation has on others. We can't do that. However, we can and we must develop our own convictions about this matter of judging others. And in our doing that, friends, we need to be cautious about where those convictions are derived from. I hope it goes without saying, we cannot form our convictions from this hodgepodge of opinions being articulated by those around us. The world obviously does not agree on how to view the subject of judging others. But in addition to that, hopefully we also readily recognize that these are merely the opinions of man. And opinions, as they say, like noses, everyone has one. And opinions can be right, opinions can be wrong, opinions can be misguided, opinions can be misinformed, and for many other reasons, opinions, that is not a reliable source for determining our own convictions about judging others. So we know where we shouldn't look. Where should we look? Now, we just sang the song, right? Give me the Bible. Yeah. As Christians, surely we are convinced that the only reliable source for forming our convictions on this and really any other subject is the Bible. Because we are confident that the Bible is God's inspired word. 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17. And since it is God's word, you know what? That makes it true. That makes it the undeniable truth on this and any other subject. John 17:17. Friends, this amazing book is the revealed mind and will of God. Our Creator, our Judge. And His profound love for man has our God instructing us through the inspired teachings comprising this book. It has our God instructing us on how we ought to live, how we ought to live rightly before Him and with our fellow man. Well, when we recognize that about our God and about God's book, the Bible, well, it shouldn't go unnoticed that this is a book that has a great deal to say about the subject of judging others. And just as some preliminary evidence for that, I would ask you to please appreciate the following numbers. Now, Angie, I took this from Strong's Exhaustive Concordance. Mine deals with the King James Version, so this is the King James Version. But from Strong's Exhaustive Concordance, in the King James Version, the word judge is found 191 times. The word judges is found 52 times. Now, Irene, these are kind of peculiar to the King James Version, but judgest and judgeth, that's found 35 times. Judging is found 6 times, and judgment is found 294 times. I would ask Elena to add that up in her head, and I knew she could. But just looking at the numbers, I mean, that's well over 500. In fact, Tanya, I believe it was, in calculating it, closer to like 570 some. 570 times. And please understand, those rather large numbers, they do not include other English translations of the original words that are typically translated judge, or at least some form of that root word. What I'm saying is, the Bible has a lot to say about this subject. And it far exceeds those raw numbers of 570 some. This book has a lot of information on the subject of judging others. And as Christians, I hope we agree, this book, the Bible, God's revealed word to man, that should be the sole source consulted in our forming our convictions on this hot topic of judging others. So, I invite you to join me as we entertain this question. I posed the question for our thoughtful contemplation during a series of sermons. What does the Bible say about judging others? Now, before we dive into a consideration of that important question, permit me, if you will, to share a story with you that hopefully will kind of bring to our attention some introductory observations about this matter. Now, the setting for this story is a small country town, maybe like Williamston, Ricky. Small country town, and there was a case that was being tried in their courthouse. And because of the nature of the case and those that were involved, most of the individuals were longtime residents of that same small town. And so it came time for the prosecutor to call his first witness to the stand. And his first witness was a grandmotherly old lady. We'll call her Mrs. Jones. And to kind of break the ice and make Mrs. Jones feel as comfortable as possible before he got into the meaty questions, the attorney asked her a rather casual question just to get things going. And so he asked her, "Mrs. Jones, do you know me?" Well, Mrs. Jones responded by saying, "Why, yes, I do know you. In fact, I've known you since you were a small boy. And quite frankly, I'm very disappointed in you. You lie, you cheat, you talk about other people behind their back, you even try to manipulate people. You think you're a rising star in the legal community, but you are nothing more than a two-bit paper pusher. Oh yes, I know you." Well, needless to say, the prosecutor was a bit taken back by Mrs. Jones's response. That is not the one that he was anticipating. And so he kind of nervously chuckled and wasn't sure what he should do at this point. So just kind of reflective thinking, he quickly asked his witness another question. What do you see the defense attorney over there? Do you know him? Mrs. Jones did, and she responded to that question as well. She went on to explain, "Why, yes, I know him very well. I actually known him and his family since he was just a youngster. In fact, I used to babysit him many decades ago. And I had very high aspirations for him at one point while he was growing up. But he too has been a real disappointment to me. He's lazy. The man has a drinking problem. He's bigoted. He couldn't tell you the truth if the truth slapped him in the face. Moreover, his law practice is one of the shoddiest practices in the entire county. You want to know if I know him? Yes, I know him very well." Well, at this point, the judge kind of rapped his gavel to bring the courtroom to order, because you can only imagine hearing the things that Mrs. Jones just put out there. That resulted in the court being anything but in order. And so the judge says to the lawyers, "Come to the bench." And he kind of leans over to speak to them in private. And I didn't know this, but I understand that judges have a husher button. And they can push that and it goes shh to kind of drown out anything that he might say in private, as sidebars. And so he pushes the husher button and he leans over to ensure no one can hear him. And he says to the attorneys, "If either one of you asks that woman if she knows me, I will jail you for contempt." I think we all would likely agree. That humorous story highlights some helpful takeaways, doesn't it? By way of introductory observations about judging, especially about judging others. Number one takeaway. I think we all recognize that the judging that Mrs. Jones participated in regarding those two poor attorneys, that is a type of judging that none of us would welcome. I think also we would agree that is a type of judging that we would consider to be something that people shouldn't engage in. We probably would say that's inappropriate. But at the same time, secondly, another takeaway, that story readily attests to the fact that the concept of judging, even the word judging, does not always identify the same activity. The man in the black robe who rapped his gavel and addressed the two lawyers at his bench, he served in the capacity of a judge. That was his very title. Here's an individual who had the duly delegated authority and the solemn responsibility to judge. That is, he is the one who is eventually going to render a judgment in this case regarding the accused, whether that individual was innocent or guilty. He also, in his role as judge, was to ensure that all parties involved acted fairly in their quest to determine the truth in this trial. Again, a responsibility that inherently required for that man to make some judgments. Now, we would not denounce that form of judging as wrong, would we? So, for the third takeaway, I trust that we can easily perceive from this story why some people might have the opinion that it is wrong to judge others and that no one has the right to do so. Because you see, they have been influenced by people like Mrs. Jones. They've been influenced to adopt the view that judging others is what Mrs. Jones participated in. When she judged others, those two lawyers, she rendered mean-spirited condemnation that served to humiliate others publicly. Now, whether what she said was true or merely her assumed opinions or maybe an admixture of both, friends, Mrs. Jones used a public forum to render her judgments about those two men when it was neither necessary or in any way served a useful purpose. So, if that is how some people view all judging, like what Mrs. Jones did, can we not at least understand why some people hold the opinion that judging others is always wrong? I'm hopeful that those introductory considerations kind of help set the stage for us now to give a thoughtful contemplation to this matter of judging others. And at the very outset, from our observations from the story as well as hopefully our own experiences, we need to be impressed that in our forming a conviction about judging others, we must acknowledge, we must go forward accepting the fact that the concept of judging does not always mean the same thing. The concept of judging can involve many different connotations, many different activities. I just want to, again, use some resources. Yeah, Sister Irene knows. I've had this, obviously, for a very long time. It's a New World Dictionary. One of the features about it I like is it has etymologies, it has examples of how to use the word. Some modern dictionaries don't have that. But anyways, I'm reading these entries. The entry is under the word judge, And this again is the New World Dictionary. After it offers some etymological observations, it says this: judge, an elected or appointed public official with authority to hear and decide cases in a court of law. Number 2, a judge is a person designated to determine the winner in a contest, settle a controversy, etc. 3, a judge is a person qualified to give an opinion or decide on the relative worth of anything. It gives us as an example, he is a good judge of music. 4, this is another reason, Sister Irene, I keep this one. It actually mentions Jewish history. And it says any of the governing leaders of the Israelites after Joshua and before the time of the kings. All right, so that's judge as a noun. But judge is also a verb. Listen to these definitions in the entry of judge as a verb. Number 1, to hear and pass judgment on persons or cases in a court of law. Number 2, to determine the winner of a contest or settle a controversy. Number 3, to decree. Listen to number 4, please. Judge can mean to form an idea, opinion, or estimate about any matter. Number 5, judge can mean to criticize or censor. Number 6, judge can mean to think or suppose. And so, in our approaching a study of judging others, in our attempting to form a conviction of whether or not it's right or wrong, it is critical, friends, for us to recognize that one of the first things we have to do is to determine what kind of judging is under consideration. We have to figure out how the word is being used. But there might even be other considerations that are going to have some bearing on whether judging is proper or inappropriate. For instance, by whom is the judgment being rendered? Another one might be, how is the judgment being rendered? In other words, in what spirit is it being given? Another consideration is, for what purpose is it being rendered? Is it constructive criticism, or is it mean-spirited condemnation? Now, I want to remind you, get back to the board, please. I want to remind us that our question, the focus of our study, is what does the Bible say about judging others? But once again, I hasten to point out that even a cursory hearing of some teachings contained in the Bible clearly warrant the conclusion that the study of this Bible subject of judging others, it needs to be thorough. It needs to be comprehensive. By the way, I would submit that that should be the approach of a study of any of the Bible subjects, but this one especially. We cannot presume that our convictions on this matter of judging others is going to be something that is easy to derive at. Something that we can do quickly. Friends, this is something that's going to take time. It's going to take effort on your part. It's going to take diligent research on my part. And just to illustrate what I'm talking about, we'll conclude this morning by this exercise. Please permit me to read some Bible quotes. Now, please understand, these are taken directly from the King James Version Bible. That, without reading the entire verse, or without understanding their context, without taking into consideration other important matters, hearing these, friends, could sound rather contradictory. So here they go. First two are from the book of Romans. They're pretty much consistent with one another. But here's one. Let us not, therefore, judge one another anymore. That sounds prohibitive, doesn't it? Don't judge one another anymore. Another one from Romans. For wherein you judge another, you condemn yourself. And so from Romans, you get this prohibitive statement. Don't judge one another anymore. And then the consequences, which would urge us not to do it. Because when you condemn somebody else, you judge somebody else, you're going to condemn yourself. All right, the next three. By the same inspired penman, Paul, but from a different letter. This is the letter that he sent to the church at Corinth. First quote, "He that is spiritual judges all things." Now, Paul considered himself spiritual. Put his name into that, therefore, Paul judges all things. But then, another place, same letter, "Therefore judge nothing before the time until the Lord come." You see the problem there? Both found Paul talking about judging. One, he said, judge all things. The other one, he says, judge nothing. And then, also from the same letter, "For I verily," Paul speaking, "for I, Paul, verily have judged already him that has so done this deed." Now, wait a minute, Paul. You said don't judge anything before the time when the Lord comes. And now you said, I've judged already. You see a problem here? Is Paul being inconsistent? Is Paul being a hypocrite? To the Romans, he says, don't judge. To the Corinthians, he says, judge everything. In fact, I've judged already. But don't judge anything before the Lord comes. Can you see just hearing those? Somebody being confused? All right, well, let's go to Jesus. 4 quotes from Jesus. John 8, verse 15 about himself, "I judge no man." Also from the book of John, "For the Father hath committed all judgment unto the Son." Now, wait a minute. Jesus just said, "I judge no man." And then he said, "But the Father has committed all judgment to me." And then here are instructions by Jesus. "Judge not, that you be not judged." But Jesus also said, "Judge righteous judgment." That's an imperative, friends. That's a command. Friends, I conduct this exercise. I make these preliminary observations just to help us recognize that forming our convictions about judging others, even after we have decided that we're only going to use the Bible, that's our sole source, that's the only one we rely on, that's the only one we depend on, even after having done that, this is going to take some effort. It's going to require some thoughtful deliberation, some serious study. We're going to have to invest some time in this. Because let me just tell you how other people deal with this. For instance, the less than intellectually honest and unbelieving skeptic, he hears those quotes that we just read from the Bible, and you know what he cynically exclaims? See, it just goes to show you the Bible cannot be from God. That book cannot be true because it's filled with contradictions. Tracy, I actually heard a debate recently where he used some of those quotes and talked about Bible contradictions. But then there are going to be others. There are going to be others who want to express their convictions about judging others by blatantly wearing a catchy phrase on their t-shirt, put it on their bumper sticker, put it on their cap. And they are going to prematurely adopt one of those partial quotes without a careful consideration of what the Bible is actually trying to say in that passage, or without an honest inquiry and investigation into what the Bible says in its entirety on the subject of judging others. And so I'll leave us with this. Here's my appeal to you. Here's my appeal to me. Here's my appeal to us. Friends, we need to be more patient than that. We need to be deliberate. We need to be honest with our study of that question. What does the Bible say about judging others? If we want to ensure that our convictions on this subject are consistent with what the Bible teaches, we have to take our time with this. Now, I'm not advocating for you to give me a long period of time to address this series. I'm just saying personally, I can't make your convictions for you, and you can't make them from me. I'm just saying, if you want to have a conviction about this hot topic of judging others, don't get it from the world. They're all mixed up. Don't adopt it off some t-shirt or a bumper sticker. Because you can't capsulize it like that. Go to the Bible, the reliable source of God's truthful word, but take your time. Take your time. Because as I hope we have demonstrated this morning, there's a lot of things you got to factor into a study of this subject. Now, maybe, Sister Irene, if you want to capsulize it, you can say this: I'm going to judge others consistent with what the Bible teaches. I don't know. Elena, if you're an entrepreneur type, make up a bumper sticker. I know we can have 10 of us here that'll buy that one. All right? I'm going to judge others consistent with what the Bible teaches. That's a good summary statement. I hope it's a helpful study. I do agree it's a hot topic. I do agree there's a lot of confusion about it. And we can be influenced by what other people think and say about it. Let's be honest with the Bible. And we'll look at what the Bible has to say. And please understand, this is going to be the hem of the garment type thing. This is the tip of the iceberg. Because as we've seen, there's 500 uses plus of the words judge, judging, judgment. And so we're going to have to be selective. But I hope we can at least channel our thoughts to bring us to a conviction about the subject that is consistent with what the Bible says. If you're here this morning, you're not a member of the Lord's church. We're not trying to judge you. But the Bible says that if you're outside of Christ, you're not prepared for judgment by God, who knows all things.